If you haven't installed Blender already, visit this page, blender.org. It's that simple. Like, visit blender.org and you will be prompted with this page with a warm welcome, of course. So after you click on the download Blender 2.92, which is a version I would prefer for now. So blender.org/download/ is where you will get all the versions in it. So now what we will be doing is, first of all, this is the final input output that we are working with. So we are going to work on something like this. It is a satisfying loop animation video, basically. So this goes on and on. The idea is that this is a seamless cut, and we will be looking, and I'll be sharing my knowledge on how to create such an animation on Blender. Now, before that, we will see on which steps we break our animation into. So these are just 3 basic steps that we'll go to. It is super simple. So the first thing is that we will be doing a satisfying loop animation. So the order for this is also kind of important to follow so that you don't mess up in the later stages. And if you did so, you'll have to start from the beginning sometime. So make sure you follow the right order. So the first thing's modeling. And in modeling, we will be basically creating the shapes, the basic shapes, and we'll put together these shapes to create the objects that we require for our scene. This will include basics such as the plane or the background colors and lightings that we will go with. But modeling will mostly include the objects that are required for us. Like in this case, we have a pendulum to work with. I don't know if we can call it a pendulum, but it's like a weird pendulum, right? And also a ring. So the next step is texturing. This is the cool part. So this is where you put together colors onto your objects, you paint them up, you give them details, and you create imperfections basically so that it looks more real. And also the last part and the major part where we will be working with today is animation and lighting. Now animation is where we will be creating such an effect on Blender, of course, today. And lighting plays a very major part, so we will cover that as well. Lighting actually gives life to whatever you're trying to create, and it will make it emphasize more. Yeah, so up to here, we will be going one step at a time. Modeling, we won't rush up, and we should, at the end, if you follow along and then everything is painless, you will have something like this in the end, and you can do it probably quite easily. Speaking of which, I also have a drive link. So this drive link contains all the necessary resources that we want for this. I have included textures, and I also, for the curious minds there, I also included the blend file. So if you open this blend file, you already have the end result with you. So if in case you have to improvise on it or you need something for the reference in the future related to this, you can go check that blend file as well. Now comes the part. Right? I'm sure everyone has Blender installed now, so we will move on to the session. Very well. Now, so when you fire up Blender, you are supposed to see this splash screen, right? This intimates on the version number, which is 2.92 in this case, and also on which format you want your files to be. Let's say you lost it, you can always get it by clicking this small little Blender icon here and click on splash screen, and then you get it. And now, as there, you also see your recent files, and this is basically the format which tells you about the software version that you have installed and what formats it allows you. For this, we will go with general. Most of the times you will go with general. So click on general. And once you click on general, you will be fired up. Here I already have clicked, so I already have the file. So the basics are that, and one thing to follow along is that sometimes I might go a little faster and not tell you about the keys I'm pressing here, so that I have my screencast enabled so that you will see the keys that I'm pressing. So follow along that as well. Now, first things first, the first thing that we will do is modeling, of course, like already told here. So for that to happen, we will basically get rid of our cube. So the reason why we get rid of our default cube is pretty simple, because a default cube might have quite a few attributes to it that we cannot customize. So to delete anything in Blender, you click on that object, Once it highlights, you press X and then you click on delete. That's simple. Now you click on the cube as well, hit X and then delete. Now both's gone. You keep the camera on. That's fine. So now we will do the modeling part, which is quite easy. So Shift A. Now when you press Shift A, you get this long list of options that you could choose from. We will go to Mesh, that is the first one, and then click on Cube. Now to summon or spawn anything at all in Blender, you press Shift A, and then you get the add call. And then you go to Mesh, or you go to Lights, spawn anything. So now we have a cube here. So the idea is to create a pendulum. Is basically a cylinder suspended, like suspending a cube. So we have a cube already. What we want is to add the rod. The way how we could add a rod is to spawn a cylinder. Now before we do it, I would like to minimize the cube a bit, for which the basic keys for transforming any object in Blender is S, G, and R. S is for scale. Once you click or once you press S, you could scale the object. Once you press G, you could move the object. Once you press R, you can rotate it. Quite simple, right? So now we will just scale this down a bit, or it's according to you. And then now, once you do it, we will add the rod now. Now before that, I will hit G and then Z so that it locks to the Z axis. Now once that's done, I will bring it a little up so that these grid lines don't annoy me, right? So basically, once the cube is there, we just need to add the cylinder. So Shift A, click on the cylinder. Once you have the cylinder, we will move the cylinder in the height, not on any other axes. So I hope everything's clear until now, or else you could just unmute and ask away. It's fine. So now, once I'll just go by it again. So Shift A, you bring a cube into the scene, G and Z, and so you have a cube now. Now the way how we will do this is to bring another cylinder, and we will scale down the cylinder on top of a cube to give such a look to it, right? So for that, Shift A again to spawn a thing, go to Mesh, and then you will press on cylinder. Once you choose cylinder, if you hit G, you will be able to move. If, let's say, you accidentally move your object where you don't want it to, if you right click, it snaps back to wherever it was initially. So now, if you hit G and then Z, which would mean that it will only move in one particular axis. Now, if you are a beginner, for you to explain that how axes work in Blender, it's simple. You see a gimbal, like you see all the axis points here. So this is X, Y, and Z. So blue is always Z, which is height, and X is the length, and Y is the width. So now we will just move it on the Z axis. So G and Z, and then we'll move it somewhere over here. And now we will scale it up. And it's okay if yours is going beyond the boundaries of the cube. It's fine, but make sure that it's at least straight away, it's like center. Now that we have scaled it up, now what we want to do is to scale it down, to like narrow it down so that it appears as a single rod rather than a complicated or a junky object, right? So in order to do that, you scale it on both axes so that you can equally scale it down, but not on the Z axis. Way how you do it is once you press S, and then you will have to hold Shift and Z. What this does is it excludes the axis Z and only focuses on X and Y axis. So this should give you, once you drag through your mouse, this should give you a thin rod. Once that's done, I will move it a bit so that not everything is inside the cube. You can have a few centimeters or a bit of it inside a cube so that it doesn't snap back or it doesn't look empty or whole or as if it's levitating. Now, moving on to the other step is where, like said, this goes with the same, but you don't have to accurately do everything, like I say here, but sometimes it's fine if you do so. So for this, you will have to follow that because once you kind of take it above the cube and leave it, it will always look fine, even though it's like a very minor gap in there. But in render, always in render, you will find a lot of mistakes and that would be too late. So in order to fix that, what we will do is we will make sure that at least a part of it stays inside the cube so that it's kind of connected, right? So now that done, this required no perspective at all, so that we just worked on it as in a normal 3D viewport display itself. We didn't move across, we didn't rotate and stuff. But things from now on will require us to stick to one perspective, meaning that one side, which is the front, right? So for this, we will be using the left orthographic view. In order for you to shift sides, the shortcut key is to hold Alt, and then once you press on your middle mouse button, and then you drag it, each time you drag with your middle mouse button, you change axes. Okay? So now, once you do it, make sure you are in left orthographic view, which is to mean that you are basically looking at it very straight without any perspective. Right? So now we are in the left orthographic view. To make sure that you are in the left orthographic view, there is this information column right over here in the top left, where it will tell you which way you're facing and what's your viewport currently containing, which is one collection and it has a cylinder, right? That's one I selected. Once you select a cube, it says cube. So now that we have the cylinder in your scene right and ready, and what we will do is we will try to scale it above more on the z-axis. Reason why we are doing it is because we need something to look like it is supporting the structure below. At this point, it just looks like a stick, right? So in order for that, we cannot directly go to S and Z our way to create it because we have a lot of part inside, and moreover, it scales. When an object is scaling or rotating, it always does it from the middle. Now that is the Blender's way of thinking that the object starts from here. And that is why this small looking orange dot is called the origin of an object. Now for that to change, we need our origin point somewhere over the top so that when we rotate it, let's say it doesn't rotate like this, but it rotates from top. For that, we will click on our cylinder and then go to edit mode. The way you go to edit mode is to press tab, and then once you are in edit mode, you will see a lot of vertices and everything selected. So this is how you actually, yeah. So this is how you go to edit mode. You just click on any object that you have to edit, and then press tab, and then you go to edit mode. And now if you hold Control A, you hold A, it selects everything. It selects every vertex and every face in your object, and that's what we want. And now we will be shifting the origin to the point above, and the way how you will do it, there are two ways. I'll be going with the easiest way. So once you selected your object, once you're in edit mode, once you toggle the A, you will be able to hit G and Z, and then you can go all the way down until the origin is somewhere over here. It's fine after that. You don't have to concentrate to keep it on the edge, and make sure you don't leave the edge as well, so that it will just stay there. And now, once the origin is shifted, however, you will hit tab again, and you have you have the object in the blender with the origin point. Now to bring it back to the original position, of course you press on G, Z, and then bring it back up again. And so now that is fine. Now if you go to edit mode, and you can just drag a bounding box. If you click and then hold and drag a bounding box across, you can just select the top part of it. Now, what mistakes that usually occur is that when you select a part of it, you don't select the other side as well. And it's kind of complicated for us to manually go and do it. So that there is this cool little feature in Blender called the X-ray mode. On your top right, you see a bunch of spheres here. And then right left to the first sphere, there is this box. And it says, when hovered around, it says toggle X-ray. Click on that. Once you like drag a bound above it, you'll be selecting the top part. Now if you hit G and Z, and then extend as much as you want. And then now comes the part again where the origin is again shifted. So G and Z, and then change the origin. Now once everything like such is done, now the origin is shifted. You can see that the orange dots now above it. Now G and Z, and now it's looking pretty fine. Toggle off the X-ray mode, and now we have something that looks similar to our cube or our pendulum, right? Now, something to keep in mind is not to move the cube at all. In this process, if you have done so, let's say you did move the cube a bit and it's somewhere else, make sure that you bring it back to the center of the world. We call this a world, meaning you have a 3D virtual world here. So to bring something back to the center, if you hold Alt and G, G is for movement, like previously discussed. So if you hold Alt and G, it will tell the object to delete everything regarding memory and it's regarding the location in its memory, and it will snap back to the OS. And now G and Z, so that it it kind of connects with that. At this point, now comes the most important part, which is to save your file. Before that, we will make sure that we will rename our object in the scene so that it makes sense. But if you could tell, the pendulum is a single object. You don't have to go around, play with both of the objects, animate both. That's a mess. In order to fix that, once you press on this object, and you hold Shift and press on the other object as well, which is both objects at this point. If you press Ctrl and J, you join the object. Join at the right. And now it says cylinder, but what it has is it has both the cylinder and a cube. Now when you move it, both moves. It's a single object at this point. So Ctrl J, and then it's a single object. Now comes the fun part, and also the most important part, to save your file. And now, once this is selected, Control S, just like any other software out there, Control S is the global way of saying save the file. So Control S, and then we name the file. We will name it a loop, or V8 loop. Now, you can name yours anything. So once that's done, if you just have to go figure out, it's most probably in directory C for you. You can choose any other file directories you want, and once you give it a name, and just save the Blender file. Now that's done. Each time you progress through something, let's say once you finish the entire modeling, you'll have to save it once in a while, because if the Blender, if so, crashes, you will lose it. You'll not only lose it, the file might get a little corrupted as well. So you don't want that to happen, right? So Control Z to undo, and then Control S to save. Global shortcuts. Now that our pendulum's done, we will move on with our simple boundary across which or through which our object will move. And for that, what we will do is we will basically create it right on top of it. So that's why I told you to move your objects to the center, because it is quite complicated if you move it around and then spawn the objects again. So for that, what we will do is we'll go back to the left orthographic view again, Shift A, and this time we will bring a plane to our scene. Once there is a plane, scale your plane a bit. That is enough. Hit S and then scale it a bit. You'll see that it's there. And now the first thing you observe is it does not look like a plane, it's just a straight line, right? Now that is because we are in an orthographic view, meaning that there is no perspective. So in order for it to face you, you'll have to rotate it. And the way to rotate it in front of you is to press R to rotate and give it an axis, which is Y. And then now you could, if you move around, you can rotate this object. It's in a 3D space, so you can rotate. But it's a manual work. The short way and the smart way to do it is hit R, Y, and then 90, which is to specify that it should rotate in 90 degrees. And now this part is done. What we will do is we will move our plane to a position where it is right on top, like slicing to the cube. So G, Z, and then we will move it somewhere over here. That looks fine to me. And then now you can scale it down, scale it up, anything. I would prefer you to not play around with this a lot because the scaling with it a lot because at the end it's all going to look something like this, and we will get back to that later. Yeah. So once this is done, I'll just go a little outside my boundary for this. So this is how it is supposed to look if you look back. So it is basically right here, right? So what now? If I just move my pendulum out here, you don't see the cavity inside the surface, right? You don't see the hole. To bring that hole in, what we will do is we will press on it. For us to make the object a little more visible, we will disable the viewport, or we will hide the object from the viewport. So click on the pendulum. If you go back to the top right of your screen, you see there is objects in our scene visible with names. So if you toggle off the plane, you see this, right? So now what we have to hide actually is the pendulum. So that is called the sphere or the cylinder here. So toggle off the cylinder and then click on the plane. Now once the plane is available, please go to left orthographic again. Press tab to go to edit mode. And now follow along quite carefully because once you hit, if you right click and then you will have to press on subdivide multiple times. So subdivided once would mean it changes into four sides, subdivided twice, subdivided thrice, and then now you should basically have about 64 subdivisions, basically meaning that you now have a plane neatly spaced into 64 parts, right? So if you're at it again, now you don't have to go mess around, like delete all these parts. Now that would be manual and quite frustrating. So now you just go click on the face select. You have three options here. You go select the rightmost object, press on a single face, and then if you go to the most diagonal corner of it, and then hold Control Shift and then click. You click everything like a matrix. Now X to delete things. Here we don't want to delete vertices or edges. We have to delete the faces. So click on faces, and that's gone. So now that is done. So now this is fine. We will bring back our pendulum back to our scene. Now, the part is that you observe that our pendulum needs a little more weight to it. It appears as if it's a paper, right? To fix that, once you have the surface selected, we will go back to modifiers and add a few modifiers. But before that, if you remember or if you observe it carefully, you see that these rings or the hollows which the pendulum moves across or through as slits to support the handle, right? So that the handle could move on. For that, we'll also do it within the edit mode itself. So toggle that back. So go to the edit mode. And then once you hold Alt and press, make sure that you're in the X select mode and on the face select, which is basically the middle icon. Just click on the middle icon right here. It says edge select. If you hover around, click on a single edge. We will move it across so that it is just right after the handle of our pendulum. So for it, we will bring back our pendulum now for a quick bit. We will, and now we will hit G twice. And now, as we do it, we will bring it back to the very corner of it. Same applies to the other side. G twice, and then you can move it to the very corner of it. Now that is done, I'll toggle this off. Select this edge. We don't want that edge anymore. Delete basically the vertices, and that will remove all the other parts for us. Other thing that I might have forgotten here is that yours might kind of slice through sometimes. So in order for that to not happen, we'll also make sure that our cylinder is kind of smaller or our plane is quite big. So once the surface or the plane is selected, you will go to the modifier and press on the solidify. Now within the generate column, if you go back down here, there is something called solidify. Now once you press that, you'll see a little pop-up here. This is basically a modifier. You just have to increase the thickness now, and you see that we are adding geometry, or we are adding a lot of solid to our plane. And then once the offset is set to 0, you can just drag a bit thickness, and now you have the thickness laying up. Okay. So you can also have all the thickness you want. For this, we will just keep it somewhere over here. That looks decent. Now, if you go back to the already render scene here, the final output, I should say, you see that once it goes in loops, the object is quite smoother, and moreover, it doesn't have much sharper vertices and polygons to it. In order for that to be adjusted, you will go add another modifier. And now this time, within the generate itself, it's not solidify, but right below solidify, there is something called the subdivision surface. Click on subdivision surface, and within the subdivision surface, there is something called the levels view. So the render is set to 2 by default. You can go set the levels view up to as well. If your hardware is quite excellent at handling a lot of polygons, you can go around and push it to 3, 5, whatever. For this, we'll just leave it. Now, once that's done, you see that you have a little bit of a curvature down here. So once that's done, you press on the plane, or now we'll just call it the tunnel. And so now, once you select your tunnel, right click and then shade smooth. What this does, it adds smoothness to the vertices in the edges, so that now it doesn't look as if it is a jagged knife, but more of a smoother looking object. Now, if we go back to the left orthographic view and then go back to the edit mode, what we observe here is that you could just toggle on the X-ray mode. Now, what we observe here, there is a lot of curvature here, and it feels as if the cylinder or the pendulum moves across very easily. So to avoid that, so Control R once you click on the edge vertex, Control R is to create a edge loop. Now, in this case, you could just follow along whatever I'm saying, because at this point, it needs a lot of explanation. But in simple words, an edge loop is what gives the vertex a identification on where it should end. So once you select on the one of the edges in the corner right here, Control R, and you see its yellow lines, one's horizontal and one's vertical. You move around and click when it's vertical. And if you move it to the corner and give it a very nice and edgy look. Yeah. So now Control R on the other side as well. Click only when it is vertical, and then click again once you're satisfied with the edge point. Well, that looks fine. That's as we wanted. And once that's done, you could go back to the normal solid view instead of the edit mode. And then now we have both the objects. Now the modeling's done. We will rush through a bit through the materials and then go on to the animation. Okay, now comes the best part, which is to texture your objects. In order for that to happen, what we will do is we will basically go into a viewport, but even before moving to the next step, which is basically shading or called texture, you save your object or the blend file again so that you don't lose it. So in order to go to the shading, there is all these options above here. What you will have to select is something called the shading. Once you click on shading, you're prompted to this window. You see how your object looks. Now it doesn't have any texture on. It doesn't, meaning that it doesn't have any picture on or colors on it. So to give it such a color, what we will do is we will click on new, and as simple as that, it does nothing. Now the reason it does nothing is because we didn't give it any color. We just introduced it to the textures that could be applied on it. Now if you change the blend color, you could change the colors of it, and it looks very fine. It's up to you to change. However, to create a texture like such, right in the scene, we need something that's called inbuilt texture or a predefined or scanned textures. To get that, I have included a drive link, like said before, where there is two folders. One's texture and others texture 2, a painted metal. We'll be using the first one for this. So download all these. So once you download all the images within the textures, you are good to go. So to apply the textures for it, what we will do is you will go to the edit and then go to the preferences. And once in the search, you will search for something called node granular. You just press on node, you will be popped up on the third side with something called node wrangler. Make sure the box is checked. Once it's not checked, please check it. This might take a moment, but once that's done, you'll be good to go. So after that is done, you press on these nodes. Now these boxes, individual boxes, are called nodes. You click on the node, zoom in, click on the node which says Principal DSDF. And then if you Control Shift and P, this takes you to your directory where you might have your blend files or your texture select, right? So mine somewhere over here. I'll select all 4 of my images that I saved from a particular folder, and then I'll click on what is called Principal Texture Setup, right? Okay, very well. Now that we have selected a texture that appears to be the wrong texture, I'll Control Z and then do it once again with the right texture. So Control Shift T will open a directory for you. This time it is this one, right? So this is the texture we will go through for the tunnel or the cavity that our pendulum will moment through. So on this hand, this is the texture. For the pendulum, we will give it another texture. So hit new, Control Shift P again. Now this time, I'm gonna do the same mistake. So it's that. And then once that is done, you're supposed to get it, right? So Control Shift P and then select. Now if this, but the thing is, you can have all the textures you want. You can also, you go to the proper drive link here, you see that there is a README file which gives you 2 links. Now for textures, however, you could visit this link called the texturehaven.com. Once you go there, you will get all sort of the texture, be it wood, be it cement, be it granite. You can choose, drag and drop. Like I said, use the Control D. For ours, however, we will be going to change the colors a bit and play around and do stuff. So what I'll be doing is instead of right away copying from whatever's already been done, we'll just go through a basic texture for this one. I will choose a different color for this time. So this time this is a red cube, and then we have everything set up and ready for us. For in order to mess up with our textures on already defined complicated structure of textures here, what we will do is right after you click the metallic node, if you shift A, and insert, if you search for this particular node called color ramp, it will spawn a new node. Position it in between the metallic and the principal node. Once you position it, once you hover it around, you see that the string below it highlights. If you click, it just snaps there, right? Now what this does is it enables us to control whatever the node it is. So I'll just bring back this, and then this again, then play with it until I'm kind of satisfied. Now this looks a little more metallic to my eyes. So I'll just settle with something like this. And now we can do the same thing with the roughness as well. Click on roughness, Shift A, search for a color ramp, place it here, takes a moment. Now play with the roughness as much as you want, and then it's already good to go. It's kind of reflective at this point. Now comes the crevices. Crevices meaning the ridges or the imperfections on your surface where the object is. In order to play with the crevices and the ridges in your object, within the third node, which says a normal map, there is something called a strength here. In the purple looking at. Increase the strength, you see that our object gets more and more jagged and more with imperfections. If you turn it down to 0, you see a very smooth looking pendulum. We'll give it a bit. We won't increase it as crazy as it gets, but we'll just keep it somewhere over here. Now this is texturing. Basically, we are done with the texturing. So now if you go back to the layout, you don't see anything. The reason being that you're not looking at the right viewport. So like I said before, you have a bunch of spheres here. You go to the last sphere, that is the rendered sphere. You don't want to go to that view yet. So we will stick to the third one, which is material tree. And yeah, so now we have our pendulum and also our tunnel. Yeah, so moving on to the best part, which is basically animation, the third one, and lighting. Lighting is basically a bonus at this point. So for us to animate, we will make sure that we are looking at a good orthographic perspective. If you hold Alt again and move it through, you will choose this. And what you see here is a front orthographic view. So make sure you're looking at a side view of it. Now, in order for us to get an animation like such, which is basically a pendulum swinging around while all the other cubes or tunnels or whatever you would like to call it move across each time when it comes to the middlemost point. So for that, we will click on a pendulum. If you rotate a pendulum right across the y-axis, so R and Y, you see that it moves as smoothly as we want it to. Right click, we'll just keep it here, but we will make sure that it is proper so that we have a loop and not a little mistaken or little error video where you could observe the little imperfection. So the imperfection is only supposed to be in textures and models to make it a little more interesting and a bit more realistic. But in forms of animation, it is better for a loop video to have a perfect keyframe, right? So for that, we click on the pendulum. And then once you have it, you go to the top right corner, and wherever you have all these icons, yeah, if you go to the corner, you see your cursor change into a plus icon. Click and drag, and then you open another window, basically. So in this window, you might ask, we already have the same window. Why would we need another one, right? So we need this one to look at our timeline. Basically, this is what you see down here is also a timeline, but we need a timeline that could be more editable and manageable. For that, the timeline is called a graph editor. And for that to change, we will go select this part, which is called the editor type. And within the editor type, right beneath the animation, the third one from the first is called the graph editor. Click on that and you see this. Basically see a graph. Now save your file once again. At this point, we will start animating. So that is good if you save it. Now that's done. What we will do is we will now comes the part where we might use a little systematic approach to how we are trying to do this. So your amount of frames for this animation is going to be 240, right? At a 60 FPS animation, 240 would basically mean 4 seconds. For which we have, if you look at start and end screen here, you see that it starts from 1 to 250. Since we want just 240, you click on that and hit 240. And but if you want your render time to be a little more shorter or smaller, what you could do is you could select the division of 2 here, so which is 1 to 120. But whatever I do here, and if you are quite a little into Blender and you already know the basics of Blender, what you could do is for every step that I am doing, you could divide the values by 2 and then you could follow that. And you will come up with a 2-second video basically. So, but I would recommend you to just go with whatever I am doing right now. So with 240 frames selected and with front orthographic view on this side and then a graph editor on this side, you click on your pendulum and then hit R, rotate, and click it once. And this is supposed to key your object. For that to happen, however, keying is when the Blender will know at which point of your timeline was the object, in which direction and which pose. So there is this toggle here called the auto keying. Once you press that, each time we move an object or make changes to an object, it will consider it as a keyframe. So whatever happens after that, it will be recorded. So we'll just click on the auto keying here. Within the first frame selected, right in the timeline, we hold G and then click. You will see a adorable orange icon here, which would suggest a diamond orange icon, which suggests that you have a keyframe. You might as well see it in the graph later. So now the magic is to go to frame 120 and then click on your pendulum, R and Y. And then if you hit 30 on your keyboard and then press enter, you see that it is basically 30 degrees from the origin point. Now, basically what it does is it goes from 0 to 120, and then it has to go back to 140, right? We are a bit, I must say, we are a bit inconvenient in using the numbers and doing the math. So what I'll be doing is we will select the first keyframe, hold Shift B, we are basically duplicating it, bring it back to the last point. This is exactly where it started. Or what you could do is you could increase the timeline. So basically what it does for now is it doesn't just go back right here, but what it does, it actually goes to the 30-degree angle and then snaps back, right? So X, I'll delete that, right? So the thing to do is from 0, you go to 60th frame. What we want as per the video here is it starts from point and it goes back to the same point. For that, what we do is we go to the 60th frame, RY, hit 30 so that it's fixed there. Now go to the 120th frame, RY. Now instead of 30, you hit negative, which is minus 60. Next. So 60 is basically the opposite of the 30 here, which is negative 30 to the center and another negative 30 to the other side of the axis. Now once that's done, if you play it now, you see that it slowly goes there and then comes back to the other side, right? So 1, 2. So now what we are planning to do now is to move this to 240th frame, 120, moves up and then goes down. So on the frame 1, it is basically on the other side of it. So RY. Okay. On the frame 2, it basically goes back to the swing in the center. So RY in negative, oops, RY negative 60. And then within the very last frame, it has to dangle a bit to the initial stage. So that in this case, we'll just select the first frame, Shift B, which is a duplicate, and bring it back to 240. So once that's done, it's quite clear now. So it goes back. It is very, very slow now. So at this point, to speed up the things, to make it more interesting, like I said, this is basically a 60 frames animation. So in order to convert it into 60 frames, You see a microwave looking or TV looking icon. Right below it, there is something called the output properties. Within the frame rate, go select 60 frames. And now if you save your file and play it again, see that it's way faster for you, right? Now, basically, the animation is done for us, right? One thing is that if you drop down your object transformation here, you see all these complicated icons. You don't want any of these except for the Y Euler rotation. That is everything that we animated so far. So that for the rest, just delete yes, X and then delete everything except for the Euler. It's gone. Now you only have to focus on what's being animated. So I'll just to just add a bit of a momentum to whatever is going on. What we will do is we will basically click on one pivot point here and then hit S and then give it a little scale. Do it on both sides. And then this is basically the frame where it goes to the other side. So we will scale it here. And now if you play it, the pendulum has a little momentum to it. It feels more real because it now has a little weight, right? So control S, and then the pendulum's right and steady. Now you don't want the graph editor anymore in this occasion, so we will just go to the corner of our first window and then drag and drop it, and now you see an arrow icon, so which basically suggests that you will basically collapse the window onto the other. Now that's done, you are all left with a single pendulum going to the tunnel and doing its thing. You can actually stop here and call it a day by rendering it, but we will, since we just want to, we will just go to a camera to see how it looks. I want my camera to look somewhere over here, and so what I will do is I will shut my screen here, and then basically hold Control, Alt, and 0, and my camera will snap back to wherever I was looking at. So wherever you're looking at, if you feel like that is the frame you want, like this is the frame I have to put in my render, Control Alt 0, and your camera will go to that particular position. So I want mine to look somewhere over here, so Control Alt 0. Now this looks fine. Now all we have to do is just to add a bit of the same duplicates of whatever we did, we'll just copy paste them and then to animate it again, right? So at this point, it is quite easy. But one thing to keep in mind is to do it properly. So once that's done, you pick on the cube or the tunnel, Shift B to duplicate it, click once so that both of them are in the same place now. Now if you hit G on the Y-axis and hold Control on your keyboard, and then if you start to move it, you see that it moves in quite a few boxes, it snaps, right? So when it comes to the edges, one thing to note is to hold Control and then move it 1 point at a time. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm pretty sure 5 is enough, but we gave it a 5. I'll just give it another box. So make sure a gap between each of it is basically 6 increments. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Right? We'll do it multiple times on both of the sides. So we will give it 3 here and then 4 here. So Shift D again, click. Make sure it leaves it properly and then give it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So now you have 6 to count. Just have to count 6. Once you have 6 vertices, it's all fine. I hope it is clear until then. It's getting quite complex, so that you might as well just stick to whatever I'm doing here. You also have the blend file in the drive link so that you could check on that and improvise wherever you were left at. Later. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Very good. Basically, we have about 3 here, and so we also want about another 3 on the other side. Shift B. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Count the cubes. If it's 6, then you leave it. You basically get the idea. We'll be speeding through because we might as well run out of time on this one. So who's done already. So and just another one now. G on y-axis, holding control. You see there are 6 equal spaces here. If they are not 6, you give it another space. Once you do this, you'll see we have a bunch of icons here. The idea is to cover your entire camera with how many arrays you have so that the video doesn't have an empty thing there. So each time it loops, it just appears as if this is an endless row of such tiles. So you just aim to put it somewhere over here so that we can minimize the amount of duplicates that's going on there. So somewhere over here looks kind of good, but then it's not really properly placed. So we'll just wheel the camera a bit. Position somewhere over here and then control all 0. And it looks kind of fine. So the idea here is now to animate this, for which before we will just give it a little plane right in the bottom so that it appears a little more fancier. And then lower it down on the z-axis. Use a material. We won't be using textures. You can as well use textures. Like I said, link is given in the driver. So you could just use a texture, for which I'll be choosing the same color, some same color of the already suspending pendulum. And then I'll increase the metallic nature of it so that it receives a bit of light and then reduce the roughness so that it's a bit more glossy. Now that that is done, we will move on to animation. So the objective here is pretty simple. You turn on the upper keys here, and then if you play, you see nothing. Like make sure that it's completely stationary at this point. So the thing is, each time it moves across the very first frame, the idea is that it has already moved once. So for the first frame, we will go to the 60th frame. That is where the first pendulum goes through the tunnel. We'll just go a few frames back, which is frame number 57. And now turn on the auto keying now. And then make sure that you move it so that at this point, while it comes to this, it moves all the others to, it just shifts the position. Right? But there's a thing. If I move this now, you see only this moves. How do we move everything? Now there is a concept in Blender and also in other 3D softwares called parenting. How parenting works is basically consider parenting is when an object moves, desired object moves, it also moves everything all along with in the same particular motion, rotation, and position. Basically, think of it as a child holding a parent's hand while walking. So wherever the parent walks, the parent takes the child with it, right? So once you select everything, now then hold shift, click on the main tunnel, the first one we created, and then control P, object keep transform. Once you do this, if you hit G and then move it, you move everything. Now, right at frame number 57, this might be a little work of, if you follow more bit of a math and if you statistically do it, you'll have to maintain proper gaps between each movement and stuff. For this, since we will have to end it a little shorter and keep it a little more simpler, we will be doing it kind of appropriately because we don't want those appropriate in the sense appropriate to the basicness of this tutorial. So we'll kind of move it on the y-axis. So at frame number 57, just move it to the tunnel so that now the next one is already aligned. You just have to check if and we'll move on now. Click it, G, click. And now you see this. Now nothing's basically happening from the start to end because our first keyframe is basically the same version. So our first version is keep, or write on second version, G, Z, Y, and up here. The next one moves across. So this is done once. We'll do it once again, but only and only when the second one comes, right? So until then, we don't want our next one to move. I'll tell you what. If I just position it roughly, saying that fine, I'll just move it now, and then record it. What will happen is when I scrub through my timeline, I see that it goes through one perfectly, meaning that it doesn't do it perfectly in the first sim. Even if it does, it already shifts us to the second one, and it's kind of junky because you see that it's not even going through the slit that we just made. So we will give it a brief gap. So delete the last keyframe now and shift B, and then I'll give it quite a time to play with. So it is done. Right when this will start again, we will record it again so that now G and Y, and then the next one will come. One done, and two is done. Right? Now, as I told you before, our frame ends here basically. But you see that you already lose one in an array or a row, so that it's fine if even if you miss a count, yeah, you can just shift B and do it again. Fine. Make sure that you don't key it. Shift B, G, Y, hold control, and then have it back. So somewhere over here. Go back to the first frame and play it. You see that it goes through once and then perfectly goes through the other. And then this will keep continuing. Now, in order for you to like experience it properly, make sure that you don't select anything. Click on something else to see if you see an extra edge at something. You see that nothing exists until this part comes, right? At this point, we didn't key it so that the other one doesn't exist. So G, Y, and then properly. And now it basically does the thing for us, which is fine. So by now we are already in the last step, and when we have one thing to do, which is lighting, which is pretty simple. Now if you go back to the rendered view, you see that it says lighting. You say it's a rendered view, so and you see there is no lighting, right? So in order for you to even get a light into the scene, you have to do the basic things, Shift A, and then within the light, we will not choose anything else here. We will choose a point, GZ, and you basically play with this for a while, version it better. A simple thing to do is to follow a 3-point lighting system, which would mean that your scene will use at least 3 points majorly. So one is a primary light that we have already positioned. Once you click on your light, you will see this. If you don't, click on the green icon here, and then these are the light properties. Within the power, give it a good 1000, and then you see it lights up a scene. It is not that impressive now because you see a lot of dark shadows and etc. If you are interested in improvising on the lighting, we will cover that up one day later or someday later. So G on X, and then the other light is supposed to defeat the harsh shadows. For that, we will just position it somewhere over here, bring it so that we don't see much of shadows, and then increase its radius, keep it somewhere over here so that there is no harsh shadows, right? Now you do see that your light is now in a crazy amount. So your soft light doesn't has to be 1000. It could be somewhere about 200. That is just to add a bit of a soft light. So once I hide it, you see that there is a lot of shadows now, and now they are subtle reflections and the shadows are quite gone. For if you want to hide the reflection on it of the surface, you can just move it away and then make sure you increase the strength of it so that it lights up. Now 2 points are done. The third point is to bring the lighting from the opposite side of your camera. Why we do it, I will just go back to the solid view. Why we do it is because we want our scene to have a bit of differentiation from background, right? At this point, you do observe that our scenes properly lit from both sides, but you don't actually know if it is properly lit from the back side. And what this does, it makes your render quite flatter. To avoid this, it's kind of easy. You add an object and light. This also applies to filmmaking, right? So a camera, and right opposite to your camera, you add another light and then bump up color to some, let's say some 10,000 or something. Once that is done, you see that a little highlights appear onto the backside. What this does is without the highlights, you don't see where the object ends and where the background starts in a moving case. So when you add it, now you know that your objects, the objects in the scene, are a little more closer to you, meaning closer to the camera and more connective. You can add a lot of lights into your scene. It's totally up to you. No one's judging you on that. And also Blender has unlimited lights so that you don't have to worry about running out of lights in Blender like in real life or something like that. I like to keep the reflections back there. So, and this done. Now I'll kind of give it a subtle blue because I think that is quite better at this point. And also as a peculiar value and roughness, play around with it. And you see the colors are not really that well color schemed here because red doesn't, this contrast red doesn't actually go with what we are trying to do. So I'll just try to cut that down and put a little blue to it as well. Just play along, choose your own colors. We are not focusing on the colors right now. We are only focusing on the light. Once you have enough time, you could play along with the lighting. Now we have properly animated and lit the screen, but the stage isn't really well colored in sense of the color code because you see that it's kind of pale looking colors. It's not that catching to the eye. So choose better colors. And once you get an idea, you will basically get such a result. Now, if you play it back, you see that once it goes through here, once it goes again over here, and then this will keep up. And yeah, forgot to mention, always remember to duplicate another one. Mine's missing here because I didn't duplicate it during the first point itself, so that now I am kind of running into a glitch. Each time I do this, it will kind of disappear, right? That's because everything is already keyed and it's in place. So that now whatever I do, it just assumes that it is its position. So here I'll just tell the key. First frame, shift P, GY, place it over here, and then 0. And now you see it is quite good. Now comes the final part where you have to render your animation to have the video ready with you. Choose better colors like suggested. Please improvise on this. Don't leave it right here. So in order to do that, you go to the printer looking icon here, which is called the output properties. Here you can select the resolution and also the aspect ratio and all the other stuff. But most importantly, select your output. Click on this little folder icon. I'll choose mine to be in desktop. I'll call this loop. Looper looks fine. Accept. And now instead of PNG, which is a picture format, obviously, we will choose FFmpeg video. And then while inside of encoding, you will choose MPEG 4, which is an MP4 source. Now, once that's done, You click on the render and click on render animation. Once you do it, what you will see is a bunch of frames would pop up, and this might take a while. This is basically according, or this is relative to whatever graphic card and hardware you run it. But I would suggest, if you have a better graphic card or you already have a fancy lab to begin with, you can go to edit preferences and to make renders much easier and faster. You could, if you have an RTX graphic card, you can go select optics. This will basically enable, optics is an engine that enables you to ray trace. Ray tracing would mean that your objects will be fast in render and smoother in motion because the lighting is already rendered. So if you have an RTX enabled, please select the optics and it will be quite faster in render. CUDA is fine as well. If you don't have RTX, please select CUDA. And then once you hit on render animation, all the frames will start working on. And then once it is done, you can go to wherever place you have your objects run. In this case, I have this, but it's just 2 frames long because I didn't let it run through. So you get the idea. Once that is done, you'll be left with this. Make sure to save the file. And then if you properly color grade it and have it well in day, yeah, sorry. Once you properly add the colors, choose colors, look at references for it and stuff, you will be allowed to have a single result, or you will be given such a result from the software. Also, try to select multiple textures, and I hope this is basically it for today. Thanks for joining the event.